It was night, but not just any night. The sky was heavy. The wind whispered something that even the disciples couldn't hear. An ancient silence hovered over the Mount of Olives, as if all creation was holding its breath. Jesus walked among the trees. The damp ground creaked beneath his feet. Only the branches and shadows bore witness to what was about to happen. Everyone remembers the cross, but few remember the garden. It was there, in the darkness, where the real battle began. Before blood flowed from the wounds, it already seeped from his pores. There in Gethsemane, the Savior of the world fell to his knees, alone, in agony, before a destiny no human could ever endure. Why did Jesus sweat blood? What did he see at that moment that made him tremble to his very bones? This is not just a biblical moment. It's a night that carries eternal weight. A scene that takes place outside of time but echoes within every soul that has ever faced its own darkness. Gethsemane is not just a place in Jerusalem. It's an invisible battlefield. It's the moment when even God wept. Have you ever been in a place like that? Where no one understands you, where the pain cannot be explained, where even breathing feels like a hard choice. That night, Jesus wasn't just foreseeing the cross. He was staring into the abyss of separation, not from the world, but from the Father, and that broke him from within. He felt the weight of the world, literally. The weight of every sin, every tear, every wrong choice made by you and me fell upon him, not symbolically, but spiritually, like an earthquake in the soul. And when his knees touched the ground of Gethsemane, the heavens trembled. He was surrounded by friends, but in reality, he was completely alone. That night was holy, but it was terrifyingly human. Jesus, the eternal Son, the spotless Lamb, groaned, sweated blood, anguished to the point of death. Why? What did he see that night that made him plead 3 times with the Father? What was in that invisible cup that made him shudder? Today, you will enter Gethsemane, but maybe you won't leave the same. Because as you walk with Jesus among those olive trees, you will not only see his pain, you will see your own, and you will understand that the redemption that reached you on the cross began with a surrender in the garden. Prepare your heart, take a deep breath, and come with me. Because the night is not over yet, but in the midst of the darkness, a light begins to dawn. Jesus had walked with them for 3 years. He had shared the bread, the miracles, the smiles, and the deepest secrets of the kingdom of God. Peter, James, and John were not just disciples, they were friends. They had been with him during sacred moments, like the Transfiguration on the Mount, where heaven opened and glory was revealed. Now, Jesus takes them with him once more, but this time not to witness the light, but to face the darkness. The setting had changed. The sky no longer opened with light. It closed in silence. Jesus was no longer on a mountaintop, but in the darkest valley of the human soul. And even so, he asked for nothing but presence. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Matthew 26:38. It was a simple request, almost humble. The Son of the living God, who could have summoned legions of angels, who could open the eyes of the blind, who raised the dead, now asked for something that any human could give, companionship. But he didn't even get that. He withdrew to pray. And when he returned, he found Peter, James, and John sleeping. Jesus, who had just poured his heart out to the Father, came back longing for empathy, but received silence. He returned looking for watchful eyes and found closed eyelids. Couldn't you keep watch with me for 1 hour? The question doesn't need an answer. It bleeds on its own. And perhaps deep down, it echoes within you too. How many times has your pain been ignored? How many times did you count on someone and that someone simply wasn't there, not out of malice, but out of weakness, not out of neglect, but out of unawareness? Gethsemane is the garden of loneliness, not just for Jesus, but for all of us. It's the place where hearts cry for help but go unheard, where the soul twists inside and the world around simply sleeps. The Son of God himself, in the agony that preceded the cross, received no comfort, and it wasn't the Roman soldiers that caused him pain. It was the silence of his friends. Jesus woke the disciples, admonished them, and withdrew once more. The pain was still there, the cup had not been removed, and even with a crushed heart, he went back to prayer. He did not run. He did not give up, but he prayed. For the second time he repeated the same plea, and for the second time, when he returned, he found them sleeping. Luke says that the disciples were exhausted from sorrow. The sleep was not just physical, it was emotional. The atmosphere was heavy, gloomy, oppressive, and their eyes couldn't bear it. Yet even so, Jesus remained there, firm, determined, fighting. And that reveals something profound. Sometimes, even those who love you won't be able to support you. Even those who have walked with you for so long will fail you in the most crucial moment. And that doesn't mean they don't love you. It means they're human. This truth hurts, but it also sets us free, because it teaches us that emotional dependency must die in the garden so that obedience can live on the cross. Jesus didn't curse them. He didn't walk away. He didn't reject them. But he also didn't expect anything more from them. He left them sleeping and kept praying. His mission did not depend on their support, and perhaps yours doesn't depend on anyone but you and God. When the soul is at war, there won't always be witnesses. Gethsemane is the stage of the invisible, where obedience is forged in abandonment, where love is tested in silence, where faith is proven without an audience. Have you ever been in that place? Have you had to keep going, even without support? Have you moved forward even when no one noticed your pain? If so, you are not alone. Jesus has been there before. He knows what it's like to pray with a torn soul while others rest. He knows what it's like to be surrounded by familiar faces and still feel invisible. He knows the bitter taste of absence in the most critical moment, but he also knows the strength that rises when all that's left is God. Gethsemane shows us that the silence of friends can be the final shaping before complete obedience, that the greatest miracles don't happen before the crowd, but in the darkness of the soul, that the true victors are not those who are applauded, but those who persist even without witnesses. Jesus won there in solitude. He won when he chose to love even when not understood. He won when he decided to obey even without being accompanied. Comment now, even alone, I will continue, or share how this scene touched your soul. If this part spoke to you, like and send it to someone who also needs to be reminded. Even Jesus was left alone. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what you're about to hear next will never leave your soul. In the end, the cross was public, but the decision was private. Redemption began there, on the cold ground of a silent garden. And even with no one to watch with him, Jesus stayed. He stayed out of love. He stayed for you. He moved just a few steps away. The distance was short, but the chasm opening up was infinite. There, among the silent trees of Gethsemane, the Son of God fell face down on the ground. He was no longer the master teaching crowds, nor the prophet confronting Pharisees. He was a broken man, praying, but this was no ordinary prayer. It was the kind of plea that carries the weight of the universe. Jesus, who always prayed with authority, now pours himself out in agony. His voice does not carry commands, it carries anguish. His body is not upright, but it is prostrate. And what comes from his mouth is not just a phrase, but a collision between the divine and the human. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Matthew 26:39. Those words echo with a pain that few could comprehend. Jesus' prayer is not rebellion, but sincerity. He's not running from his purpose, he's confronting its weight. He knows what is coming. He has always known, but now he feels it. Because knowing you are going to die is one thing. Feeling death approaching is another. Jesus does not fear the pain of the nails. He does not fear the thorns. He does not fear the mockery. He fears what no one else could see. The moment when, bearing the sin of the world, he would feel the Father withdraw, the first and only time in all eternity. When the Son would be left alone, and that is what makes him tremble. That is why the prayer hurts. That is why heaven falls silent and blood begins to boil within. He asks that, if possible, the cup be taken away, not out of cowardice, but out of love. Jesus does not wish to avoid the cross for himself. He wants to ensure that it fulfills its eternal purpose. And that in itself shows the magnitude of his sacrifice, because even while sweating blood, he surrenders. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Here is the turning point. The prayer begins as a plea and ends as surrender. The Son of Man does not flee, he obeys, even with a bleeding heart, even with a tormented soul, even without the support of friends, even in the face of heaven's silence. Jesus gets up, he goes to the disciples, and once again, they are sleeping. But the prayer is not over. He returns, prays a second time. The Bible does not record his words in detail now. Perhaps because human words are not enough to express what took place there, but we know, he continued. He returns a third time, and this time there is no more resistance. The soul is surrendered, the will dead, the love complete. The prayer shattered heaven, not with shouts, but with obedience. Have you ever had to pray like that? Have you ever knelt down without strength, not knowing what to say, but still surrendered? That is the prayer of Gethsemane. It doesn't change the circumstances. It changes the one who prays. It doesn't remove the pain, but it gives the strength to endure it. It doesn't prevent the cross. It prepares the heart to embrace it. And that is why Gethsemane is so decisive, because there, before the cross, the sacrifice had already been made. When Jesus said, "Your will be done," he had already won. The prayer shattered heaven because it broke the heart of the Son. And in doing so, it opened a path that no angel could open, a path of obedience amid pain, a path of submission amid anguish, a path of faith when everything inside you wants to run away. Jesus chose to obey. He chose to love. He chose to surrender. And it was there, on that cold ground, in that sacred soil, in that crushing darkness, that the cross began to take shape, not as wood, but as a decision. There were no open wounds, no soldier had touched him, no spear had pierced his body. And yet, the blood began to flow, slowly, silently, like a pain that starts from within and manifests without fanfare. Jesus was alone, just a few steps away from the sleeping disciples, lying on the cold ground of Gethsemane, face down, with a crushed soul. He was sweating, but the sweat was not ordinary. It was blood, thick, sacred drops, running from the brow of the Lamb even before the first lash was struck. Luke the physician is the only evangelist who describes the phenomenon, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Luke 22:44. He knew what he was witnessing, hematidrosis, an extremely rare medical condition caused by severe physical or emotional stress, where the capillaries feeding the sweat glands rupture, mixing blood with sweat. But to Luke, it was more than a medical explanation. It was a spiritual sign, a foreshadowing, a silent declaration of what was happening behind the scenes of the visible. The greatest war in history was being fought from within. This blood was not shed by swords. It was drawn out by the pressure of the world's sin upon the shoulders of one man. That garden, once a place of refuge, now became a battlefield, not between armies, but between will and mission, between flesh and spirit, between a soul that fears and a love that insists. And the struggle was so intense, so overwhelming, that Jesus' body could not withstand it. His pores, crushed by anguish, burst even before the cross. The pain of Gethsemane was not physical, not yet. It was internal, invisible, but as real as any nail driven through flesh. What weighed upon Jesus that night was not just the anticipation of death, it was the burden of divine judgment, the weight of humanity's collective guilt. The sin of all times, of all peoples, of all generations, from Adam to the last man, was concentrated there on one single being, a sinless being who now bore the sin of all. And the impact was more than emotional, it was spiritual, it was cosmic. The lamb was being prepared for the sacrifice, and the altar was his own body. Isaiah had prophesied centuries earlier. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter. Isaiah 53:7. But before the slaughter came the pressure, before the cross came the invisible crushing of a soul that offered itself to be shattered. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, says the same prophet. And there in Gethsemane, that peace began to be purchased, not with words, not with promises, but with blood. The first blood of redemption was not shed on the cross, but in the garden. It was the blood that sprang from decision, the blood of surrender. The blood of "Thy will be done." This blood, which touched the earth before the crucifixion, is the blood of silent obedience, and it carries within it something that the cross itself would not yet reveal: the pain of obeying, even when strength is gone; the pain of staying, even without support; the pain of continuing, even without consolation. No crowd witnessed it, no disciple understood it, but heaven saw, the Father saw, and the ground of Gethsemane knew. And maybe, somewhere within you, this scene feels familiar. Maybe you too have bled from within. Maybe you have faced pressures so great that your soul seemed to collapse, even when outwardly everything appeared calm. Maybe you have prayed with words no one heard, wept tears no one wiped away, carried burdens no one knew how to name. Gethsemane is that place. The place where pain is not spectacular, but devastating. Where suffering is not visible, but absolute. Where the blood that flows does not come from the skin, but from the soul. And that's why this blood holds such power, because it is not just physical, it is existential. It does not merely represent what Jesus suffered, it represents what he chose. He chose to feel, chose to carry, chose to obey, chose to remain. And that silent blood shed without witnesses sealed the decision that would save the world. It wasn't the scourging that made him bleed first, it was the anguish. And this blood, which touched the ground in silence, spoke louder than any crowd at Calvary. This blood still cries out today. Not like the blood of Abel, which called for justice, but like the blood of the Lamb, which offers forgiveness. And every drop that fell on that ground, hallowed by suffering, paved the way for what was to come: the cup, the cross, death, and resurrection. But it all started here, in the darkness, in the silence, in the abandonment, in the garden. Before the altar of Calvary, there was the hidden altar of Gethsemane, where there was no crowd, where there was no glory, where there was no visible victory, only one man, alone, bleeding for love. He was looking at something no one else could see. It wasn't a chalice, it wasn't a substance, but it was real, invisible to human eyes, yet overwhelming to the eyes of the soul. Jesus, on his knees, face down on the ground, body trembling, was not just praying in the face of death. He was staring at the cup, and this cup wasn't wine. It wasn't poison. It was the cup of God's wrath. Throughout Scripture, the cup symbolizes more than suffering. It represents God's judgment poured out against sin. Isaiah describes it: "Awake, awake, rise up, Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath." Isaiah 51:17. The prophet Jeremiah, when announcing judgment on the nations, also speaks of the cup as the instrument of divine indignation. And in Revelation, that same cup appears filled with the fury of God. Revelation 14:10. That's what Jesus saw. It wasn't just the physical suffering that awaited him, but the fullness of God's justice against all human wickedness, concentrated in one single moment. Imagine the mind of Christ, perfectly holy, pure, uncontaminated, about to be enveloped by all the moral filth of the world. Imagine the spiritual horror of a sinless being, about to become sin for us. As Paul says, he who knew no sin became sin for us. 2 Corinthians 5:21. Not just carrying sin, becoming repulsive, despicable, undesirable, so that we might become the righteousness of God. That is the cup, an invisible yet lethal content, a mixture of collective guilt, global shame, total abandonment, and temporary separation from the Father. All of that Jesus saw, and even so, he accepted it, not without anguish, not without sweating blood, but he accepted it. Not because he was insensitive, but because he was completely obedient. The Father did not force the Son. The Son gave himself. This decision was voluntary, even though it cost him everything. Gethsemane is the stage of that surrender, where love bows under the weight of justice, where the Lamb chooses to drink every last drop of the cup so that we would never have to touch it. Jesus knew what that cup meant. He knew that by drinking it, he would place himself between heaven and earth. He knew that the Father in his holiness would have to turn his face. He knew that darkness would cover the world for hours. He knew that the cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" would not be theatrical. It would be real. And even so, he rose. Have you ever faced something no one else could see? Have you ever confronted a pain that wasn't visible but consumed you from within? Have you ever looked around for comfort and found nothing but silence? Jesus understands. He not only understands, he went through it at a level no human could ever endure. The cup he drank was more than suffering. It was substitution. It was atonement. It was the condemnation of the righteous in place of the unrighteous. And it is at this point that Gethsemane becomes even more sacred, because Jesus' greatest pain was not the cross. It was the awareness of separation from the Father. The one with whom he had been one for all eternity would now be, for a moment, distant. Not out of lack of love, but out of fidelity to justice. The holy would be treated as cursed, the obedient as a rebel, the pure as unclean, so that the cursed, the rebellious, and the unclean could be treated as sons. The cup was, in essence, the just response of God to humanity's wickedness, and Jesus drank it to the end, without leaving a single drop. He did not taste it. He completed it. He absorbed the wrath to deliver grace. He bore the pain to offer relief. He experienced spiritual death so that we could live eternally. And the most astounding part is that no one saw it happen there in the garden. To the sleeping disciples, it was just another night. To the world outside, it was just a rabbi praying. But in the unseen, in the eternal, in the heavenly backstage, the greatest decision in history was being sealed. The Son was saying yes to the cup. The Son was accepting judgment. The Son was taking the place of all the guilty, and heaven bowed in reverence. There is no way to fully comprehend this moment, but there is a way to worship it. There is a way to be broken before the greatness of the love that submitted to justice. There is a way to recognize that while we were spiritually asleep, the Savior was drinking what would destroy us. Gethsemane is not just the garden of anguish, it is the altar of choice. It is the place where Jesus looked at the cup and said, "Yes, I will drink." And with that, redemption began to seep through the cracks of time, reaching sinners in every generation. Grace did not begin at the cross. It was sealed there, in the darkness, in the silence, in the solitude, and in the cup that only he could drink. After the third prayer, after the blood, after the silence, after the accepted cup, something happened. The heaven that seemed so distant moved. Luke records it with sobriety, and there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. Luke 22:43. Just one sentence. No details, No glorious description, but a moment that carries the weight of all heaven in its simplicity. The Son of God, prostrate in agony, sweating blood, crushed by the weight of the world, is touched by a creature he himself created. This is the paradox of Gethsemane, the Creator, sustained by one of his creations. The source of all life, comforted by a messenger, the eternal for a moment in need of strength. This does not diminish Jesus. It exalts his humanity. It shows that he did not pretend to be a man. He felt as a man, suffered as a man, needed as a man. And even being God, he accepted being cared for. We do not know what the angel said. We do not know if he spoke at all. Perhaps he just touched him. Perhaps he just knelt beside the Lord in silence. Or perhaps he brought relief that words cannot explain. The fact is that this moment reveals something that even the cross did not show so clearly. Even Jesus needed to be strengthened. And if even he did, how much more do we? This is the touch that lifts Jesus from the ground. Not a triumphant touch, not a glorious touch, but a touch in the dark, a touch in the midst of pain, a touch that comes when the soul is at its limit. And this touch changes everything. It doesn't take away the cross, but it gives strength to carry it. It doesn't prevent the pain, but it strengthens the faith. How many times on our journey do we also need this touch? How many times are we on the ground, spiritually exhausted, needing heaven to lean down to us? It won't always come with a spectacle. Sometimes it will be in the silence, in a whisper, in a verse, in a memory, in a comfort that no one else sees, but it comes. Because the same heaven that sent an angel to Jesus still moves for you. The angel did not come before the pain. He came after the prayer, after the surrender, after the blood. This teaches us something essential. God's comfort does not come to avoid the cross. It comes to strengthen those who have decided not to flee from it. Jesus was not spared, but he was sustained, and that is enough. There, on that dark night, on that blood-stained ground, a celestial being kneels beside the Savior and strengthens him. Such a small gesture to human eyes, but so gigantic for eternity, because it reveals that heaven is not absent. It just acts at the right time. And maybe that is exactly what you need to remember. You may be in Gethsemane, feeling alone, in pain, in anguish. You may be on the ground, exhausted, without words, but heaven sees and heaven sends. It may not be as you expect, it may not be when you want, but it will come, because heaven's strength manifests in total surrender. Gethsemane was not just a place, it was a process. And it was not an isolated event in the life of Jesus. It was a mirror of the human experience in its rawest and holiest form. The truth is, sooner or later, we all go through that garden. And when our time comes, there's no way to avoid it. Gethsemane is where the soul bends, where the will is tested, where the heart must decide between fleeing or obeying. There are moments in life when words no longer suffice. Answers don't come. Friends don't understand, and even the body fails to respond. It is in that place that we find ourselves facing the same cup, not the cup of God's wrath as Jesus faced. He drank that for us, but the cup of surrender, of obedience, of yielding, the cup of our will being crushed so that God's will may prevail. And this process is painful, because it means losing control, ceasing to fight the inevitable, surrendering to the invisible. Have you ever been there? Have you ever spent a night where everything felt dark and cold, and your soul trembled with fear in the face of what you knew you had to do? Have you ever faced decisions that seemed to tear you apart inside, even knowing they were the right one? Have you ever felt that the ground where you were praying became a battlefield between your flesh and your faith? Gethsemane is that place where there is no glamour, where there is no audience, where heaven seems distant. And yet, it is precisely there that God is closest, because it is in the silence of our inner struggle that He shapes us. It is on the ground of our pain that He prepares us, and it is in surrender not in resistance, that he fulfills his will in us. Many think that obeying God is easy when you are full of faith, but the greatest obedience is born when there is no more emotion, no more strength, no more light, and still you say, "Yes, Father, let your will be done." That phrase, spoken in the dark, holds more power than 1,000 prayers spoken in comfort. It is at that moment that heaven opens, not with noise, but with meaning. Because Gethsemane is the place where you die to yourself and live for God. It's not an emotion, it's a decision. It's not about feeling, it's about believing. And Gethsemane reveals this perfectly. Jesus was not strengthened before he prayed. He was strengthened after he surrendered. The comfort came after the cross had been accepted in his heart. It's the same with us. God does not remove the cup. He gives us the strength to drink it with courage. And as paradoxical as it may seem, there is peace in Gethsemane, because there is nothing more powerful than knowing that your pain has purpose, that your surrender has a destination, that your yes in the dark is echoing in heaven. And when you go through that garden, and we all will, remember, you are not alone. The one who prayed before you, who bled before you, who bowed before you, left marks on the ground, so you would know the way. Gethsemane is the place where you stop controlling and start trusting, where you no longer want, but still obey. And that silent obedience changes everything. Everyone talks about the cross. They preach about it, sing about it, write about it. The cross is recognized as the center of the Christian faith, but before it was raised on a hill, it was accepted in the heart. Before it became a symbol, it was a choice. The cross was the stage, but Gethsemane was the altar. It was that night, among the olive trees, without conscious witnesses, that the Lamb surrendered. Not to the soldiers, not to Pilate, but to the Father. "Rise, let us go, here comes my betrayer." Matthew 26:46. This phrase does not carry fear or hesitation. It carries resolve. It carries obedience. It carries a love that, though wounded, refuses to retreat. Jesus was not captured. He gave himself up. And that changes everything, because it shows that the cross was not the end of a flight, but the fulfillment of a mission. He did not fall into the hands of men. He reached out to them with his own hands. And when the soldiers arrived, armed, led by Judas, Jesus did not hesitate. He had already decided. He had already won. The blood had already been shed. The soul had already surrendered. The cross was merely the consequence of obedience sealed in the garden. That night changed everything, because there, on the ground of Gethsemane, love triumphed before the pain began. There, obedience spoke louder than fear. There, the silent decision of one man changed the destiny of all others. And even knowing what was to come, Jesus stood up. With his face still marked by bloody sweat, with weary eyes, with an exhausted body, he rose, because God's will had been fully embraced. If there's one thing Gethsemane teaches us, it's that true love proves itself in the dark, not in the crowds, not on the altars, but on the cold ground of solitary obedience. And it's there that the kingdom begins. It's there that the cross gains meaning. Because it wasn't by force, it was by choice. And now that choice calls you not to carry the weight of the world. Jesus already did that. But to carry your own cross with the same determination. To say yes where your will wants to say no. To stay where everything in you wants to give up. To obey even without applause. The cross was the spectacle, but Gethsemane was the altar. And if this night spoke to your soul, comment now. I won't run from my Gethsemane. Like and share with those who need to remember that even Jesus wept before obeying. And subscribe and turn on notifications, because here every story reveals a piece of heaven that begins on the ground.